As we continue our road trips in Hastings County, we find ourselves today in the village of Madoc in this very attractive park. Now, we have crossed about 40 kilometers of southern Hastings County in coming here. And you will notice as you go through the rolling hills and the farmlands that as you look around at the rock cuts, they're all the same. Gray, flat, limestone. Well, these are, of course, sedimentary rocks formed over millions of years, but by the settling of the mud from the Great Inland Sea. So southern Hastings County, Prince Edward County and the others are predominantly limestone. But as you come close to Madoc, you descend a long hill with the beautiful Moira Lake in the foreground, and then it all changes. Here in the Madoc area and north of here, you will find granite. Red, white, black, and these are igneous rocks. That means they've been formed by fire and thrown up from the depths of the earth many millions and millions of years ago. And as they hardened, they gave the landscape that we have today. But in doing this, there were cracks in the various parts of this landscape, and these filled with various minerals. There was gold and lead, fluoride, many other minerals, some in small quantities, some in larger quantities. There was also many formations of talc and marble. As these minerals were discovered, prospectors came here from all across North America seeking their fortune. Some made it, but most found that the minerals weren't in sufficient quantities to be commercially viable. In fact, there was a widespread belief back in the late 1800s that as the forests around here were all cleared by the lumbermen, then under that rock there was an endless wealth of minerals. So the rich and rolling farmlands of the southern portion of Hastings County now become the rock and forests of the center and north of Hastings County. You have just reached the southern edge of the Great Canadian Shield. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's go back. Let's go back to the very early days. Why did people come and settle here? What was life like in those very early days? And we're so pleased to have with us local historian Grant Ketchison, who is going to tell us some of the stories about the early days in Madoc.
The first settlers that came to the township arrived in early 1823, which is a mere months after this area was ceded from the Mississauga Nation to the Crown. To get here, they had to ford the river at what is now called Bronson Rapids to get around the lake. The lake, which was called by the natives Chunkal or Saganaska, was the scene, according to native lore, of a mammoth battle between the Mississaugas and the invading Mohawks. And if you now, we know with the amount of arrowheads and stone tools that have been picked up around the lake, we know that there was a major native presence. The first settlers were led by David Zeron, who with his wife and a small party came into Madoc Township. Legend has it that the group decided that Mrs. Zeron would be the first to set foot in the new township. Very shortly thereafter, James O'Hara arrived with another small group, and his son James Jr. went on to establish his farm and the now well-known O'Hara Mill. When we think of the village of Madoc way back when, we do have to remember that Madoc, as I'm describing it, was the village and the township. It was one entity until January the 1st in 1878, when the village became separated from the township. An account that we read some 60 years ago, there was an account of what the village was like. Written in 1885, this account says 60 years ago, after the founding, when this village was founded, it was a dense forest of hemlock. And now, in 1885, we're looking at a thriving village with 6 major stores, 10 grocery stores, 4 hotels, various other businesses, including foundries and a carriage house, and 5 churches, and funnily enough, 2 roller skating rinks. That's amazing growth in 60 years. However, the major impetus for this growth was the discovery of gold in 1866. In the spring of 1867, all roads led up the old Hastings Road 6 miles to El Dorado, the gold fields. People came from all over. Even Caribou Cameron of Klondike and California fame had a bit part, as well as the 25 mounted troops who came from Belleville to a barracks in Madoc, just in case that the gold fever reached too much of a fever pitch. Unfortunately for the gold producers, this fever waned fairly quickly, and the mounted police in their swords and pillbox hats were more of a symbolic role than anything else. However, in Madoc, we like to think that the Northwest Mounted Police that were incorporated just 6 years later, the idea came from the mounted troops in Madoc. And when we think of the area around the village, one of the things that they found after the gold, they found there wasn't much gold, but they did find some very fertile patches of good farmland in the township. And the same 1885 account says that the township, Madoc, now boasts a population of almost 5,000 people, and Madoc, the rural area, boasts 8 churches, 14 schools, and 8 cheese factories. Now, when we look at our sleepy village, sitting at the crossroads, halfway between Toronto and Ottawa and astride the road to North Hastings, we couldn't imagine, our ancestors couldn't imagine the hordes of people that come to villages like Madoc and small towns out of the city to our countless lakes, rivers, and forests and fields in search of quiet. They're just discovering what people like me that have lived here all my life already knew. This is a place where quiet can still be heard.
Thanks, Grant. It's clear that the earliest settlers were very determined people, were very hardy people, and I'm speaking of both the men and the women. But I have to wonder if these traits were carried on over the generations. Does the current community in Madoc, have they inherited any of these staunch determination and hardiness of the first settlers who came to this area? And for that, I turn to the mayor of Centre Hastings, Mr. Tom DeLine. I believe, Mayor DeLine, you know the people in this area better than most people. Is it your view that the current community here in Madoc and this whole area of Centre Hastings have inherited any of those staunch characteristics from the early settlers?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction there. You know, life in Madoc is very rich these days, and I'm going to use my notes here, but I don't have as good a memory as my pre-person out here. For a small community, there's pretty much everything you need, all within walking distance. We have a state-of-the-art medical center, fantastically equipped library, an award-winning skate park, as well as stores selling everything from bulk foods to beautiful gifts, many restaurants, a craft brewery, you name it, we have it. Some of our history that Mr. Ketchison has spoken about is still visible today in our architecture and historic homes. One such example is St. Peter's Presbyterian Church. The church itself was built in the 1850s and is still in excellent condition today. With our talc mining days gone, with the last talc mine, which was the largest in Ontario, closing its doors back in 2010, we still remember our history, and many of our residents can share many stories of our mining and milling industries. I do encourage you to stop and explore our lovely community. Madoc and Centre Hastings truly are the best darn places in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor DeLine. So, on this road trip in Hastings County, the village of Madoc is ready to be discovered. You know, you can visit the historic plaques, take a walk down the streets of Madoc, drop into some of the shops, and stop for coffee and a butter tart at my favorite location, the Hidden Gold Mine. So you can imagine when the streets of Madoc were filled with the wide-eyed prospectors and the hopeful settlers, right here in Madoc.